Hello everyone. So in competitive games in general, something that people really don't enjoy is randomness. Um, and I count myself among these people. I don't really like when I lose for seemingly no other reason than my opponent got lucky. And in some cases, not even seemingly, like it is literally there are statistics on screen and they just get the lucky roll, right? You know, sometimes you just miss 3 stone edges in a row and lose, and that is really annoying. But that begs the question of, you know, how do you mitigate randomness and what elements of randomness exist in a game, especially a fast-paced, chaotic game like TF2. So for starters, the vanilla TF2, I suppose that's a charged way of putting it, because whether a lot of the things I'm about to talk about do actually vary a lot in many different casual settings. But if you just play a basic casual match, then there are a few interesting elements of randomness that really don't exist for any meaningful reason. The big ones, of course, being, you know, the ever topical random crits that people love to talk about, and maybe even more impactful might not be the right word, but also very impactful is random bullet spread as well, which particularly targets a class like Scout or Soldier, just by making their shotguns just less consistent for really no reason whatsoever. But there are other, a little more less known about forms of randomness. For a very long time, fall damage was random. If you fell from the exact same height, there was actually be some variance in whether or in how much damage you would take, not whether you would take damage or not, as far as I'm aware. And there have, you know, since this discovery, been plugins and whatnot to standardize fall damage, so it's no longer a random factor. And I'm not aware. I feel like I heard that this is now like an actual in-game command you can do, but I have no idea. I could just be inventing that in my brain. But yeah, that's another factor of randomness that doesn't really have any good reason to exist, of course. Just introduces more variance for no benefit. So, of course, you know, competitive players remove it from their format. Another really, really classic example of randomness that, of course, competitive players played without for a very long time, and then eventually the game at large, it became the standard to reduce this randomness, is random damage spread as well. Like, you think that random crits and random bullet spread are bad. They are. But random damage is even crazier, because suddenly, you know, a demo's pipe can do anywhere from, I think it was plus or minus 15%. I could be completely wrong about that. I'm not sure. But a pipe could be doing anywhere from, like, you know, 90 damage to 110 damage, which is insane. I don't, there's no reason why it shouldn't be standard. And of course, I've already talked about, with regards to my video on damage bonuses and damage thresholds, there's a lot of interesting decision making and a lot of interesting ways to approach a battle and reward skilled play and knowledge of the game when you take into account the actual thresholds of damage that enemies can do. Classic example being, like, if you're 101 HP, you know you can just go hug a demo and try and do as much damage as possible to kill them, because they literally cannot kill you in one pipe. Now, of course, you could make the same argument, I suppose, that if you're out of that damage range and you're like 111 HP, if the max is 110. But even then, that's still, there's no good reason for just introducing an element of randomness. And you're going to run into situations where someone's going to be 100 HP, and then whether you get to kill them or not is literally just not a matter of whether you can hit them or not, which it should be, but whether you can hit them or not, and a coin flip on top of that. So elements of randomness can work in, card games and things like that, or I think it does work fine, generally speaking, in Pokemon, giving like some risk reward that you get to choose in making your team, whether you want to be using these inaccurate moves that are generally more powerful or whatnot. But in a game like TF2, where whether you hit someone or not is not just a roll of the dice, but a matter of your skill against their skill, then yeah, introducing other elements to muddy this matchup is obviously going to be unfavorable. Now, that being said, there is still some element of not necessarily randomness in the sense that there are just numbers being mixed up and it's just a random pick of which, but more so variance. Because of course there are, 12 players in the server, and there are going to be times where a player might not be somewhere that you expect them to, or just some things happen on a fight. Obviously, like, a mid fight is a decent enough example of two teams are going at it on equal footing, and it's not always that one team just comes out on top. And in fact, it's not uncommon for teams to be trading out mid-fights over the course of the game, with some teams winning some of them, other teams winning others. So there's definitely elements of variance to sixes. And of course, teams approach mids with different plans and whatnot. And if you reproduce the exact same mids with the exact same setups time over time, it's not just that one team wins over the other every single time. I mean, players hit different shots every single mid. So of course there are elements of, I'll call it randomness, I suppose variance is a better word, in something like this, just over the fact that, you have a lot of chaos introduced into the system. So of course there will be some element of variance there. And of course, part of that is something that a better player will be able to play around. If you think in the example of, just someone makes a decision that you don't necessarily expect, and it just feels kind of random that they were able to perfectly counter what you were doing, expecting them to do a different thing. Well, you can learn from that, and you get to adapt to what your opponents are doing. So part of being a good player, of course, is your ability to adapt, and being able to understand what your opponents are doing, even if what your opponents are doing are misplays. Just being able to kind of understand their thought process, what they're trying to achieve, and being able to counter that is not only a way of mitigating that variance by being able to properly counter them on more levels, but you're also proving yourself to be more adaptable, which is important. But yeah, overall, randomness is not a huge concern in sixes. You can look back at, and way back in the day, like, you watch one of Reptile's old frag videos, and that dude is just waddling around on sixes soldier on gravel pit, getting random crits that are going in a frag video. It is very crazy and very funny. And yeah, people way back when did play with random crits. They played with random bullet spread and random damage spread as well. But of course, as the metagame develops, and more so just like as people kind of get their footing and start to figure out, like, okay, well, this is just a stupid random factor, that randomness was slowly but surely plucked out, and sometimes even discovered and manually removed, like in the case of random fall damage. So yeah, randomness overall is not a good fit for TF2. There is enough randomness introduced just by having all the different players doing different things with different objectives and whatnot, that creates an element of chaos, but it's an element of chaos and variance through which a better player can still prevail, versus just failing a roll of the dice, such as, like a good example, I suppose, is the old lock and load with random what is the phrasing I'm looking for? With which having the random damage spread, which it used to have, would sometimes let it one-shot a scout without a buff, and other times not, which is really goofy. I remember some people would make arguments about the old lock and load with that much damage being balanced around having the random damage spread, because if it only one-shot scouts and never failed to, then it would be broken. But if it never did, it wouldn't be strong enough, and it's kind of ridiculous. But yeah, elements like that just don't really suit. I think they don't really suit the game at large, honestly, even in a casual setting. Now, of course, random crits you can enjoy, and I don't really have a strong opinion about them personally. But things like random bullet spread and random damage, there's no strong case for them. They're not unique. They're not interesting at all. Like, you can argue that random crits are interesting, at least. But yeah, there's no case to be made for just introducing inconsistency to weapons for no reason, when, you know, the whole point of the game is to play it. And, you know, I suppose there's many points to the game. People get different things out of it, but I think a video game should reward people for getting better at it. But of course, in a competitive setting, this is much less of a concern. People are very clear on the fact that randomness is just kind of bad for competition. You don't really want outside factors other than the players in the server to be influencing things very much. So yeah, I guess I just was here to offer a few examples of randomness and how randomness is kind of attempted to, or how Six's players attempt to mitigate randomness, even though it can be a high variance game at times, with just so much going on and teams trying to kind of counterplay and approach new plans and do different things to try and catch opponents off guard. That is, of course, part of the mental game and part of the meta game of just playing against an opponent in general. And I would consider that less so randomness and more so just kind of elements of counterplay and psychology, even like sports psychology or game psychology, whatnot. So anyway, probably rambled on long enough here. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hopefully it sparked some random crit discussion in the comments. I don't know. But yeah, above all, hopefully it was entertaining. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time.